If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is a supernatural event that happened in your life that just cannot be explained? I have, quite a few actually. But one that happened pretty recently stands out. I grew up in a very rural area. Mostly crop farms everywhere. About a mile from my parents' house, there was this old abandoned farmhouse that all the area kids said was haunted. They would sneak into the house after dark, all the typical stupid kid crap, but I believe there are things in this world better left alone and never went. Years pass, the house fell into disrepair and was eventually torn down, leaving an old weathered barn. Well, I make a little side money selling photos of abandoned places, so I wanted to take a picture of the barn. I parked on the road and was walking up the drive. I made it about 10 feet before I just could not walk any further. My feet wouldn't move forward, my adrenaline spiked and I burst into tears. So I turned back and ran to my car. I didn't feel safe until I got past a nearby creek you have to cross to get there. I let it go, but a few months later we had to drive past the property after having Christmas dinner with my parents and there was a creature standing in the drive. It reminded me of the faun from Pan's Labyrinth, just super tall with a wide head and horns or antlers, but the eyes were more on the side of the head. Again adrenaline kicked in and I burst into tears, but I was trying to keep it together because I didn't want to freak out my kids. My husband asked if I was okay. I just said, "You saw that, right?" "Yep." "Was it human?" "Nope." I refused to drive that road ever again. When I was a kid, about 10-12-ish, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs home alone while mom was out doing errands. We have this weird carpet runner over our hardwood stairs that's only really attached at the top of the flight but otherwise not fitted or secured to each individual stair, so naturally I step on an air bubble of carpet with my vision obscured by the laundry and fall backwards while bear hugging a bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking, "Valp, guess I'm about to die," while almost airborne with just my big toe left on the carpet when I felt two hands, one on either side of my shoulder blades, give me a firm shove that launched me back up on the step and diagonally against the stair rail. I assumed mom somehow silently came back early without announcing herself and turned around to thank her while still clinging to the railing, but no one was there. I scurried upstairs to put my things down while calling her name and walked the house afterwards to check if any doors were unlocked or if her car was there. I finally resorted to calling her cell where she told me she was hitting up a few more stores. It still feels like there's a presence on that stairwell, like someone's watching, but in a protective way rather than sinisterly. Working as night security for a small office at a sanitation plant. Building was a single entrance and you had to check in at the security station to get in or out. A worker shows up and checks in saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check in his ID and flip a few lights for him, then go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back. So I go patrol the building to find him and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas I turned lights on for him, no other lights are on, and he's not in any other rooms. I stop by security to see if we just missed each other and he's trying to leave, but nobody is there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point I went to check cameras to see where he went, but he's not on a single camera except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the next camera down said hall. At this point I logged it as an incident, and GTFO right as the relief shift showed up. Next day my boss calls me and says that worker had been on vacation out of state for several days, and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation to what happened. Apparently we lived with a benign spirit in our house for 3.5 years. This is my mother's account of what happened because my sister and I didn't see anything at the time. Only my brother, his best friend and my mother saw it. Back when we were living in South Africa we had moved into an apartment which we had bought. The moving in was actually quite eventful because a mother and her son were renting the place before, and although they had been notified they decided to stay past the date that was given to them. I'm not really sure about the details to that as I was around 7 or 8. Long story short, we moved in and started settling. After putting us to bed my mother decided to stay up and watch TV. My brother was out with his friends. As she's watching whatever show was on at the time she glances to our only plant in the house, which is about 1.5 meters tall, and sees a man roughly the same height as the plant standing under one of its leaves. Noping out of that shit she gets up and flicks the lights on. He's not there. Calling it a night she goes to bed. The next day, or maybe 2 days later, I'm not sure on that detail, at breakfast my brother, who was around 16 at the time, picked up a piece of bread, turned around to the plant and said, "Hey Michael. Want some?" Laughing. My mother asks him who Michael is and he says Michael's the guy standing under the plant at night. Mind you, my mother didn't say anything to anyone about Michael to not freak us out. My brother's best friend was also over that morning. We had basically unofficially adopted him, and my mother asks him if he sees Michael too, and he says yes. She then asks him to describe Michael, and he gives a perfect description down to the whites of his eyes. Michael apparently was a black young man around 1/45 of a meter in height, wearing plain black trousers, a white button-down shirt, and a green vest. His skin tone was quite dark with a faint sheen to it. His eyes were also dark in velour, and the whites were tinted a bit yellow. He had a permanent smiling expression on his face that didn't reach his eyes. He stayed put where he was, never moving but following you with his eyes. One morning my mom woke up to my dad coming home, who had bought this indoor circulating water thing. I really don't know what they're called. He moved the plant exactly opposite where it was, next to the couch, and put that water thing there instead. My mother didn't say anything, and that night Michael also moved with the plant. Of course, after hearing this, I asked the next logical question that any sane person would ask. Why the duck didn't she just throw away the plant? She said it never occurred to her facepalm. So yeah, that is the story of Michael, the benign smiling spirit that was a part of our family for some time. I just wish I could show people firsthand how bizarre it really was. There's this place in my hometown called Old Town, which is an area they had to evacuate because a mine was there and it made the area unsafe due to sinkholes and whatnot. I was in a class in middle school called Environmental Adventures, where you did outdoor stuff, and we went to Old Town to do some geocaching. While the class was walking, we saw an old lady on a rocking chair on a concrete foundation where a house used to be. She was dressed like an old-timey old lady, like Muriel from Courage the Cowardly Dog. She was rocking back and forth, talking to herself while she stared into the woods, not looking at us once. We found the geocache a little down the road, turned around, and her and the rocking chair disappeared. There was no way that she could have got away that fast toting a rocking chair without us seeing her. We were only at the geocache for like 5 minutes. Confused everybody. Weirdest shit ever. When I was going to my family's home, I got an SUV going down the road. This was in Bangladesh at the time, and after taking the SUV, the next 2 hours would be a highway going down a forest. I was sitting shotgun, and along the highway there was an old man walking down the highway. He was hitchhiking, and the driver decided to pick him up. He insisted on sitting in my seat and obliged, as he was an older man. About an hour down the drive, our car collided with a bus and the shotgun seat was mangled up. We all got out and we looked around, but we couldn't find the old man that insisted on taking my seat anywhere. Stories like these aren't rare, but I didn't believe them. We all know the man sat in my seat and we all saw him. But he was nowhere to be found. The thing that happened to me has stuck with me every single night for the past 28 years and happened when I was 5. There has not been one night in that amount of time that I haven't thought about it. My younger brother and I shared a bunk bed. I was on the top bunk. I woke up one night having to pee. I sit up and throw off my covers, so this wasn't sleep paralysis. I was actively awake and moving. At the end of the bed I noticed something standing there. All I see is this thing staring at me. Its head was very large and spanned the width of the bunk bed, oval in shape with 2 little yellow glowing eyes. I'm guessing it was around 6 feet tall, had dark skin and a thin neck. It was standing there just staring at me. I stared back at it for a few seconds before I did what any little kid would do, hide under the covers. I laid there for I don't know how long, panicking. I could still feel it staring at me and eventually fell back asleep sometime later. In the morning it's the first thing I told my mom, and she still remembers me doing that to this day. I had a lot of nightmares about it for a while afterwards. What's funny is that I might have seen another one of these things prior to that when I was 3 or 4. I remember running upstairs to get my star shoes, Converse, and the hallway light was on, barely illuminating my parents' bedroom. As soon as I reach the top of the steps, I look over and see half a figure in motion walking into my parents' closet. It was tall, lanky and thin, with yellowish skin. Didn't see the head, so I couldn't say whether or not it was the same thing. I ran back downstairs after that. My mom and I were driving home one winter evening. It was after dark, and the type of cold that made the entire world feel brittle and still. There was a long stretch of empty highway between my job and town, populated mainly by thick trees and the occasional abandoned building. It was unusual to see someone walking in such a barren place on a freezing night, but we both saw a man shuffling on the shoulder of the road. He was wearing a slouchy hat and an old-fashioned coat, like clothes too outdated for present day, and his face was one of the more disturbing things I'd ever seen. His gray features looked like they'd been painted on and then smeared before the paint was dry. He was a blurry mass of dark shadow. He didn't seem to notice us, so we kept driving. We freaked out a little. "Did you see that? You saw that, right?" We reasoned it away. Surely it was a trick of the light. We felt bad for leaving a man alone in the cold, so far from town. We turned around with the intent to ask him if he needed a ride. He quickly came into view again, still shuffling on, toward nothing in particular. As quick as a blink, his whole form blurred and morphed. He grew taller, more gaunt and sinewy, as if he hadn't had enough to eat in a long time. He was in full color now, and his clothing and appearance changed. He had on a pair of ripped jeans with chains and no shirt despite the cold. He was fully bald and the moonlight reflected off his pale head. He had tribal tattoos all over his torso. He turned to face us and we saw that his eyes were stunningly black, and his toothy grin felt very threatening as he acknowledged us. He ran menacingly at the car and my mom floored it. We tore out of there as fast as possible. I looked back as soon as I felt brave enough to do so, and there was no one in the road. I still think about this night and creep myself out. My mom doesn't like to talk about it. What was that thing? Not human, certainly. I used to hike in that area, but not anymore. Oh. My time to shine. So I live in the woods, 13 miles from the nearest anything, and it's a gas station 15 more miles from town, so I'm in the middle of nowhere. It's a random summer night. I'm in the living room where my 7-year-old has built an impressive pillow nest by pushing our giant ottoman into the L of our sectional and piling the resultant king-sized area with every blanket and pillow we own, and he has passed out in the middle. I'm playing a game, enjoying the quiet. I'm off the next day, so no rush to go to bed, just relaxing. Then I hear my dog bark. My pit bull Aries. Not angry, just woof, hey mom, you forgot me and I want to come in, single bark at the back door. Any pet owner knows their dog's different barks. I know it sounds weird. I look at the clock and it's only 8:30, it's a nice night out, I'm middle of a quest, he can chill. I keep playing. About 30 minutes later, I hear it again, woof, that same insistent I wanna come in mom bark along with the weird urge to let him in. Just if you let him in he'll stop kinda urge. I'm like, it's not even all the way dark, chill bruh. Go back to playing, decide to ignore any further barks, since, I know Hess safe, just being annoying and I'm busy, I'm having a good time and no one's gonna stop me, and I hear one woof and the weird fleeting urge about every 10 minutes. It would rip me out of my train of thought while I'm playing, just, okay, gotta go here and get the thing, then woof, goddammit. Now, I work a lot, 50 hours, and I'm a single mom, so my me time is very very rare. I was doing everything I could to ignore my dog being dumb, but I got annoyed. So I get to a place I can pause and he does it again. So I toss my controller down next to me, and as I go to get up off the couch to let the stupid, insistent asshole in, I hear a snore, a dog snore. I look to the giant nest of pillows and blankets that contain my sleeping child, and there, snuggled into the corner of the couch, running in his dreams, is Aries. Fast asleep. My heart dropped. I've never felt instant fear like that in my life, and a very clear, very very old instinct rose in me to not take one step towards that door. My whole body just goes, do not move, Y0 me, do not let IT know you know, just keep doing what you're doing and IT will go away. Every instinct I had screamed at me that if I opened that door I was in some very serious trouble. The most ominous thing I've ever felt. I picked up my controller, scooted a little closer to tiny Y0 me and played till the feeling passed. I heard probably 4 to 5 more barks after that, but I just ignored them. I'd look over at Aries and keep playing. Around 11:45 I noticed it felt normal in the house again, and I checked all the locks. I slept on the couch with my son. I couldn't leave him there alone. There are no other dogs near me, my yard is fenced in. It was very clearly my own dog's bark. He does that any time he thinks Hess been out too long. This time he just happened to be dead asleep. No weird tracks, and weirdest was you would think the barking would have woken him, or the 2 whiner dogs, but no, and that cropped me out too. Why weren't they reacting? It was loud. So that's my moment I can't explain. I want to share an event that happened about 15 years ago that I still think about every once in a while. One night I was hanging out with my best friend at his house when his girlfriend calls and asks if we want to go meet her and her friends at a boba tea place later that night. We say sure and plan to meet them at around 9 p.m. The boba place is about 20 minutes from my friend's house, but we're running behind and leave around 8:50 p.m. I remember the time because I sent a text to his girlfriend, from his phone, saying that we just left and would be a little late. My friend and I don't really remember the drive all too well, but we do remember that he missed the freeway exit that we needed to take, so he exited the next nearest one, and then got back on the freeway going the opposite direction. Again, neither of us can remember the actual drive on the freeway, but at some point, we had gone all the way back to the exit we would take to get to his house. After we exit the freeway this time and prepare to turn around again, thoroughly confused as to how we messed up twice on a drive we had done dozens of times before, my friend starts to wonder why his girlfriend hasn't called him, wondering where he was. He hands me the phone to call her to explain that we got mixed up and are still on the way when we both notice the time on his radio in the car, 8:54 p.m. I checked his phone and it said the same. I checked when I sent the text, and it was 8:50 p.m. We both started to get a little freaked out. Somehow, we had done two 15-ish minute drives on the freeway in less than 4 minutes. To this day we can't explain it. Late at night, 28-ish years ago in the mountains of southwest Washington, two animals ran in front of my vehicle. I almost hit them, that's how close they were to me. Both animals looked and ran like gorillas on all fours. Their hind ends were lower to the ground than their chests, kind of like a hyena. If I had to guess, they were 200 pounds plus in weight. They were not wolves or bears, since wolves were not in the state at that time, and I've seen bears numerous times in the wild. Years ago I was watching a show called Finding Bigfoot, and they had numerous reports of people describing juvenile Bigfoots as looking like hyenas or gorillas when running on all fours. I still to this day question what I had seen that night. I had not been drinking or using any type of drugs. The area I seen them in is still sparsely populated, a few miles up the mountain from Cougar, Washington, in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest at the base of Mount St. Helens. Locals know it as Kalama Horse Camp area. I was working on a mountain bike trail for myself on land owned by SPI in the Sierra Nevadas a couple of years ago. Probably about half a mile from the closest logging road, and a mile or two from the nearest development that I live in, around an hour before sunset. I had a rake, shovel, mountain bike, and a backpack with water/food. I was raking leaves away from the next area I planned on working on, when I heard some loud noises coming from a nearby ravine, about 1,000 feet downhill from where I was working. My first thought was that it was a bear. It had to be either an adult black bear, or group of people to be making the amount of noise I heard, but I was making noise, and it wasn't super close, so I kept working. A minute or so goes by, and I hear a way louder noise from slightly closer. Still thinking it's a bear, I grab my leaf rake and make a bunch of noise in the dry leaves, and loudly clear my throat a few times. There's silence for a few seconds when I stop, and then I hear the exact same noise I was making with the rake, but much louder from about 100 feet away. I'm in super dense brush and trees, so can't see more than 30 or so feet in any direction. I can't put into words the absolute terror I felt. I've read enough skinwalker stories to not want to write this off as a bear that was talented in mimicry. Lol. I grabbed my backpack and bike, and ran as fast as I could back to the logging road. I went back for the tools a couple weeks later, and haven't been back since. I've heard of birds in the Sierras that can mimic sounds, but the sounds I heard before that could not have been something smaller than a bear or several people. 10 years ago I was living with my 17-year-old son and my 18-month-old grandson Riley. We lived in a very old tiny 600 square foot single floor home with an attic. The house was laid out so that from the bathroom doorway you could see into every room, which were two small bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen and little living room. The door to the attic, between the kitchen and bathroom, was ill-fitted heavy wood and required hard yanking to open and slamming to shut. The stairs leading to the attic were steep and used as a pantry for canned goods, winter vegetables, canning equipment, hundreds of mason jars, etc. It was packed top to bottom and completely blocked off. One afternoon I was with Riley cooking dinner. I had a chair pulled up to the counter that he was standing on, crushing eggshells with a mortar and pestle to keep busy. I had to use the bathroom, so I walked past the attic door into the bathroom, leaving the bathroom door open. I could see Riley from the bathroom. We were never more than exactly 10 feet apart, and this took about 1 minute. Suddenly Riley vanished. I immediately searched the entire house, every single cupboard, every nook, every cranny, everywhere, and he was not there. The house was on a busy street and I had installed locks at the top of both doors. I knew it didn't make sense, but still I unbolted the door and ran outside yelling and searching for him. He was nowhere outside. Knowing he could not have gotten out there in the first place, I went back in, ransacking the house, calling out to him, completely panicked when I heard a muffled whimper and began trying to follow it, which led to me realize he was above me, in the attic. I ran to the attic door, yanked it open, and there he was sitting in the pitch dark on the landing at the top of the stairwell. I told him I was coming and fast as I could, moved everything off the stairs to reach him. This literally took about 3 full minutes. The entire time he just sat there with a blank look on his face. Once I reached him, I discovered each of his hands held a fist full of crushed eggshells when he let go of them just as I picked him up. I sat with him on the couch in both relief and disbelief and asked him how he got up there. He said, a deer bunny. I asked, a deer bunny took you up there? And he said yes and shook his head yes. I asked him, where is the deer bunny now? And he leaned forward and looked towards the attic doorway. I asked him if he could show me where the deer bunny is, and he climbed down, held my hand and walked me over to the entrance of the attic. He looked up the stairwell, started acting distressed and whimpering. Backing away from the stairs, he looked up at me, put his finger over his mouth and said, "Shh." I left everything as it was, put him on the couch with cartoons, called my daughter and son, and they both came over ASAP. We just could not make sense of it. We also discovered there wasn't a single piece of eggshell going up the stairs or anywhere else but the kitchen counter and the top landing of the stairwell where he dropped them. After replacing everything back into the stairwell and shutting the door, we asked Riley to open it. As expected, he could not come close to even budging the handle. We opened it and asked Riley to climb up the stairs. He put his hands on a pumpkin, looking puzzled, clearly communicating at his age level it was impossible because of everything in his way. Finally, we asked him to close the door. Again, he had nowhere near the strength to slam the door shut. I felt very worried that whatever put him up there could have easily put him in the street, on the roof, or somewhere else entirely, never to be seen again. My dad killed my mom when I was 10. I'm now mid-30s. 2 years ago I had lost my wedding ring. We looked everywhere. I even played back the security camera at work to see if I was wearing it when I left. I gave up finding it and was very upset. One night I had a dream. My mom woke me up and said, "I know you've been looking for this. I love you. It'll be out here." In the morning I was getting ready for work as usual, sat down on the couch. Right in front of me on the ottoman was my ring. I went to bed after my wife and she woke up after me. I used that ottoman the night before and there's no way the ring could have been there. Again, I checked our camera. We had been robbed once, so we kept a camera towards the front door. It could see our couch, and the ottoman had no ring when I went to bed. I still cry every now and then remembering it. I had a phase in my mid-teens when I would read the obituaries in the local newspaper. I saw a name that was familiar as it was the same as a family friend. It had his full first, middle, and last names. I didn't say anything to my parents since I figured they already knew. A few days later my mom told me he died, and I said I knew since I saw his obit. She said, "He died last night in his sleep." I went back through the newspapers. My mom kept them for a week before throwing them out, but the obit wasn't there. When the real obit came out, it had his first and last name but just his middle initial. This was almost 40 years ago and I still think about it. Early into my now wife and I's relationship I had a dream about her in childbirth. Very vivid, and long. Like I spent days in the hospital with her and everything was in a strange twilight. When it came time to deliver, things went very wrong and she and baby ended up passing away. I woke up quite shook naturally but brushed it off. I am a nurse and have had to deal with traumatic OB situations before, and I chalked it up to me dealing with that stress through a dream. 6 years later and my wife is pregnant. I have forgotten the dream by now. I get a call late into the 3rd trimester while I am on shift. Wife is going to the ER for a bad BP. I get off my shift and go to meet her. As soon as I step into the room I remember my dream. It's the same damn room. Which is extra spooky because the hospital we were at wasn't even built when I had the dream. This is last year, right when lockdown started. My wife has admitted they want to wait a week to deliver if possible. She will be kept in a twilight state until that time. So it's me in this room, eerily isolated as the world around us is frozen and my wife is incoherent mere feet away. Lingering for days in this room I brushed off my dream, trying to manage my anxiety and stress. Come show time my wife gets ready to begin pushing and it's exactly the same scenario as my dream. Things start going poorly, but the doctor thinks delivery is still possible. But at this point I finally freak out into full panic, and demand a C-section for my wife. The doctor, I can tell, wants to argue, but I think my outburst made her step back and reassess the situation and she made the call for emergency C-section. Took 10 minutes for me to get taken back and as I'm in the ER I see my baby come out lifeless. They do everything they can and manage to resuscitate her. In the meantime my wife is doing poorly and they are scrambling to control her bleeding. I follow the baby out knowing there's really nothing I can do. Baby gets life flighted to another hospital, but before we go I see my wife stable and headed to the ICU. Both my wife and baby are critical but alive. Today they are both thriving and my baby is 16 months and just a tornado of energy. I don't know that they would be alive if not for that dream and it causing me to freak out and demand a change in plan. Many years ago, my parents had separated and my father was planning on taking a trip across the country to California. He was pretty excited about it. I talked to him the day before he's leaving, wish him well and tell him I'll talk to him after he gets to California. The day of his trip, he calls me and tells me he decided last minute not to go. Refuses to really get into why. Just says he changed his mind. Seemed really odd for something that he had been planning for a couple months. That night I'm sitting at my girlfriend's house and we're watching the news, and they report that US Air Flight 1493, the flight my dad was supposed to be on, collided with another aircraft while landing in Los Angeles. About 25% of the people on the flight were killed. Hard to know how my dad would have made out, because it really depended on where you were sitting, front versus back of the plane. It was several months before he finally told me that night before he was supposed to leave, he had an extremely vivid dream that he died in a fiery plane crash. So vivid that it scared him out of flying that day. My dad is a Marine Corps Vietnam veteran who saw combat. I can only imagine how vivid the dream must have been, to scare him out of getting on that plane that morning. Night before Thanksgiving 3 years ago, I was across the country at my parents', driving back to theirs with my now wife from a friend's house. As we draw near, there is some type of bundle in the middle of the road. I stopped and pulled off to move it, and it turned out to be a barred owl that got clipped by a car. Long story short, I spent the rest of that night getting the owl into a puppy cage, gave it some food and water, and the next day dropped it off at a wildlife rescue center. I got home the next week, all the way across the country, New Jersey to Oregon. I stepped outside and there was a barred owl sitting on my fence watching me. It was gone by the time I got back. But now I know I'm straight with all owls. Back in 2010, my family and I lived in a really nice home out in the woods, and there was always weird things that happened in that home that was unexplainable. One day I was coming up the stairs from my basement, and as I rounded the corner I saw a shadowy figure running up the stairs from the main floor to the top floor. I only saw it from the corner of my eye and the figure was gone in an instant. Fast forward a couple years, I have moved on to college and my parents decided they were going to sell the home to downsize. They had just got done repainting most of the walls, and I asked my cousin if she could take a picture so I could see how the new walls looked. She took the picture in the back of our living facing the front of the house, which just so happened to have the staircase to the right, and in the picture was that same shadow I had seen year prior. She was the only one in the home when the picture was taken, and it looks like the shadow is looking right at you. In 2001, I was 17 and hunting alone for only the second time. I was a few hundred yards off of the road, and on the other side of the road lived the people that own the land. They were friends of my stepfather's family and allowed him to hunt there every year and had given him permission to take me as well. The plan was, at nightfall, my stepfather would make his way to where I was so I could easily find my way out of the woods. I was unfamiliar with this area, and as anyone knows, the woods are different when it gets dark. It's very easy to get lost. An hour before dark, I see my stepfather. He's standing a good distance away, slowly waving his arm above his head. I wondered why he was there so early and why he did not have his orange vest on. He also did not wait for me to climb down and walk to him. I got to the ground and I could see that he was walking away and was out of view before I could follow. I figured either he had a successful hunt and needed my help, or he was just ready to go home. I made the relatively short walk and reached the road before total darkness. My stepfather was not there and neither was his truck. I go to the friend's house and they let me in. I ask where my stepfather was, and the friend, Mike, said he was not out of the woods yet. I tell him that he had already came looking for me. We walk back outside as we hear a truck pull up. It's my stepfather. I tell him the story and there's an awkward silence, and I can tell that Mike and my stepfather know something, but nothing is said. There is only one other home in this road and hardly any traffic. The obvious question is, who did I see in the woods? Why were they not concerned about an unknown person on the property? We get in the truck and drive home. We get home and my stepfather tells me he wants to show me something. He brings out a picture album and shows me a few pictures of his good friend and Mike's son, Todd. Todd and my stepfather were the same age and roughly the same build, and they always hunted together on the property. I was actually hunting in a stand that Todd had originally built and had been maintained by his father and my stepfather over the years. My stepfather tells me that there have been a few times over the past 8 years when Mike, himself, and a couple other people had seen someone in the woods that resembled Todd, who had passed away 8 years prior. Went with my brother to see an old family property my mother had inherited in a really rural area. We were just looking about. It hadn't been lived in for decades. A bit of wind, a bit of a rainy day, and both me and my brother were inspecting the house until we started hearing a weird rhythmic knock coming from around the building. Just a knock at regular intervals, much like a clock sounds, but a lot louder. We stepped out to look around, but the noise started sounding like it was getting further away from us, until it disappeared. We left shortly afterwards. A couple of days go by, and I stopped by my mother's. I ask her if she has any pictures of the original owner of the house, which was her grandfather, so my great-grandfather. She pulled it out. Guess what? The man had a wooden leg as a result of a war injury. Told my mother all about it, and it was like she was remembering him. She says that's exactly how it sounded when he walked on the porch. Weird AF. My father died in 2000 in my parents' house. I was over one night pretty late after my mother had gone to sleep. I swear I could feel my father's presence, as I was right in the spot where he had died. They believe he had a heart attack while laying on the couch, tried to get off the couch to call for help but fell on the floor and died, though no one else was home when it happened. I was on the couch when this happened. Anyway, I thought to myself, this is stupid. People don't leave essences behind, I'm not feeling anything. So, I say out loud, if this is really you, Dad, knock a box of cereal off the shelf onto the floor. I wanted to pick something I didn't think could happen by accident. I went into the kitchen and watched the shelf with the cereal on it for a few minutes and nothing happened. Since it was almost midnight, I decided to sleep in my old bedroom. I woke up the next morning and went downstairs and a box of cereal was laying on the floor. I say to my mother, "Did you knock that cereal onto the floor?" She said no, it was like that when she woke up. So, what the duck, man. However, my mother had a cat. I'm guessing the cat did it, but I don't know for sure. If she'd gotten on the shelf, everything would have been knocked around and messy from her. Everything else was in its normal position, just the box of cereal was on the floor. I mean, regardless, it has to have been the cat, right? I had a dream once about my high school best friend who had moved out of state and started a family. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in at least 10 years and had never met her child, except seeing pictures/posts on Facebook and commenting on them. In my dream I was walking down a street at night and out of nowhere her little girl appears next to me and I asked her, "Where is your mama? Why are you by yourself?" I remember her taking me to some bushes near a random house on the street and finding my friend in bad shape, beaten up or something, on the ground, and I remember running to the door of the random house screaming for help and to call the police. This is all I can recall from the dream, but I think there may have been a little more. The next day, I wake up and think to myself, man, that was weird. Maybe I dreamt of her because we had just spoken a little in comments of a Facebook post. I should send her a message. I go on about my day, go to work, get home later that day and sit on my couch and scroll through Facebook. Bam! 1,000 posts, rest in peace, etc., all of them tagged my friend and her daughter. I thought, what in the actual FCK? At that point there was no information as to what had happened, so I thought it must have been a car accident or something. Over the course of the next few weeks to months, more and more information came out and it was not an accident. My friend and her sweet baby had been murdered by some animal. I won't refer to them as a person. This happened about 5 years ago. I still remember the main parts of the dream vividly. I still am a little horrified that I had this dream that night. When it was happening, possibly. I haven't been able to tell anyone else about it either because just thinking about it gives me chills. I have to make a bit of a premise. When I was little, the woman that came to clean my house, I'll call her Mary, while my parents were working, was also my babysitter. Usually after she ended up cleaning she would bring me to her house until my mom would come and pick me up. There during the year I knew her whole family. Among these was her husband that I'll call Dave. So Dave was a pretty cool guy, just the average elder you would find in any rural town. He liked to drink wine with his friends at the bar, go hunting, and he had a lot of good and interesting stories to tell me when I was a kid, and after all these years spent together he basically considered me as a grandson. Now back when COVID hit for the first time in my country, I had a dream one night where Mary was coming to my house to clean as every other week, but this time in my living room there was a closed black coffin. When I asked her what was in there, she looked at me and said in a sad tone, "Dave is inside there." Now if that wasn't strange enough, I remember waking up later that night and feeling a presence to the side of my bed, and I distinctly remember to have said while still being half asleep, "Come on Dave, let me get back to sleep." Next morning when I woke, my parents told me that Mary had called saying that Dave had passed that night due to COVID complication. To this day I still haven't told anyone about it and I am still a bit freaked out from the whole story. It was a bright afternoon and I was home alone, getting ready for my brother's hockey game. As I was finishing up in the bathroom mirror, I saw something inexplicable to my left in my brother's room. The figure of a tall, lanky man easily 7 feet appeared at the side of my brother's bed and swiftly walked to the other side of the room, out of my line of sight. I could only perceive the figure's silhouette and identified a wide-brimmed fedora and a long nose. Otherwise, he was completely pitch black. Void of light, the blackest black I have ever perceived. Confused, I walked into my brother's room, questioning whether I was really home alone. Of course, no one was there. I felt that sinking feeling in my stomach and asked my brother later that night if he ever saw someone in his room. He said no, but he's not the kind of person to admit to seeing a ghost, to be honest. Months later I told a friend about what I saw and she said, "Oh, that's the Hat Man. People all over the world have seen him." I looked it up on Google Images and yes, it was the Hat Man. When I was 19 I went home from college and stayed with my dad and stepmom in my childhood home. I had never had any "this house was haunted" vibes growing up. Some friends of ours from another state came to visit and we all stayed up to drink and smoke. It was legal in the state. Anyway, we all went to bed and my friend since childhood was staying in my room sleeping on the floor. She had stayed many times at my house with me, so nothing was out of the ordinary at the time. Side note, I have a weird sleeping disorder where I wake up in the middle of the night and see different shadow figures standing in the corner of my room. It's happened for the last 5 to 7 years, maybe longer. I don't have to be dreaming to wake up suddenly and see people standing there. It's a feeling like someone is watching me or wanting me to witness them before they go. When I say shadow figures, I mean people that I can describe to you in decent detail. Like one I remember distinctly was a woman who honestly looked like she was murdered and was covered in blood and dirt with a torn dress. However, I have never met anyone who looks like them, so it's not like my brain is recreating an image. So back to this one night, I woke up and had this feeling that someone was in the room, so I wake up and in the corner is not one but 3 figures. Now they have no characteristics and strictly look like shadow people. This felt very different than before because they just had a really bad vibes. I watch them for a second and they start moving, which is not normal. So I blink my eyes thinking they are just my mind playing tricks on me, but they don't disappear. So after a few seconds one of them starts crawling towards me and one reaches down to touch my friend's foot. I start panic and reach to flip on the light and they just disappear. My friend wakes up and is like, "What's wrong?" I am just sitting there dumbfounded because honestly I had no idea. To this day nothing like that has ever happened again, and I still see people, just not as much. Honestly, it got so bad I had to take some meds to sleep. Never understood what happened that night. I 1000% believe in the paranormal and think there are bad spirits out there. This is a long story. I got my driver's license at 22 years old and was a nervous driver. One summer in 2014, my parents were going to our family's beach house with my at the time toddler son, and I was going to meet them there the following Saturday morning as I had work. At the time I was driving a beat-up 2000 Chevy Cavalier with no air conditioning, and my cigarette lighter was broken, so I could not charge my GPS system in the car. I also didn't have a smartphone at the time, so I figured I would charge my GPS overnight and it would survive the hour-and-a-half drive to my family's beach house. What I didn't take into account, due to being a freshly licensed driver, was that Saturday morning traffic on the NJ Garden State Parkway in the summer is a ducking nightmare. I also have an absolutely awful sense of direction and I can get a bit anxious when I get lost. I left my house around 8 in the morning and texted my parents that I would be at the beach house around 10 o'clock latest, and that I would take the baby to the beach when I got there. By 10:45 I was sitting in dead stop of traffic, sweating my butt off as there was no breeze. The GPS suggested I take a different exit than I normally would, and I jumped at the chance to get off the parkway. Whatever exit it wanted me to take also brought me to more dead stop traffic. At this point, my GPS was about to die and I had no idea where I was going. I didn't even have a bottle of water on me. Around 12:30, I was driving through random towns with no idea where I was, covered in sweat. My GPS had been dead for hours and I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I called my parents, who had no idea where I was, and they suggested I stop somewhere to ask for directions, but when I did find a fire station, no one was inside. I went back to my car utterly defeated and burst into tears. I didn't know what to do, and was half afraid I would never find my way home. I thought of my late uncle, who was a limo driver and the namesake of my son. I was sure he probably knew exactly where I was due to taking teenagers down the shore every year after their proms. I looked up at the ceiling of my car and cried, "Hey, Uncle C, I'm lost and afraid and I have to get to the baby. Where the hell am I?" All of a sudden, I heard the mechanical voice of the GPS say at the stop sign, "Make a right." I looked down at the GPS and saw that it was no longer dead, but it wasn't fully on either. Instead of it showing a map or the main menu, it was just a blank white screen. It repeated to me, at the stop sign, "Make a right." I figured I had maybe a minute or so before it died again, so I went to the stop sign and made the right. The GPS directed me for the next half an hour to the front of my family's beach house. As soon as I parked the car, instead of the typical "you have reached your destination" that the GPS usually said, it just went, "Goodbye," and then died again. I had never heard it say goodbye to me before that day, and I never heard it say that again. My family and I are convinced that my uncle helped me find my way home through the GPS. And yes, I got a smartphone that same year for Christmas, so I would always have access to a GPS lol. Once my mom, my sister and I went to a Native American reservation which had a warm spring. We went there one time at 4 a.m. to say our morning prayer as a Navajo. And it was freezing cold and we had flashlights on our phone to light the way to the warm spring. We made it halfway when we saw two pair of eyes looking at us. It was two wolves, one light and one dark, looking at us. All of us had our lights on them and quickly said our prayer and walked back to our vehicle. I got to say it was creepy and weird. We took some friends to show them what we saw and show the height of the wolves. They were bigger than dogs on the reservation and would have been as big as a cow.